had a viewer reach out with a very interesting question. This person had just been hired on as a full-time hospice chaplain. Congratulations. And they said that their manager said that the previous chaplain had a very low acceptance rate, meaning patients didn't want to see them very often. And this person wanted to know my thoughts on why that might be the case. And so I'm going to share that. And I'm going to also add a couple of tips for chaplains who may be struggling with something similar on how to get your acceptance rate higher. And then third of all, hopefully some information for those of you who aren't in this industry, but maybe have a loved one on hospice, why you might want to see the chaplain. Okay. So the first thing I would say is if there is a low acceptance rate for chaplains, you want to find out what that starter care nurse is saying when they onboard new patients. Now, in full transparency, before I get into this, let me say this. My background is in sales leadership. I owned an entrepreneurial business for almost 20 years before I became a chaplain. So I think in numbers and I track my numbers. So in full transparency, my numbers for November, because I just ran those numbers to close out the month, put me at about 78% in an acceptance rate for new patients to see me. So I'm not at 100% either. But I do know that my acceptance rate is the highest amongst the 9 chaplains that are in our office. Not to be competitive, but I am a sales leader. So I track my numbers. I know also for a fact that the other chaplains don't even track their numbers. So here's that. One of the things I would say is going back to why that number is where it is and how we can get those numbers higher. First of all, you'll never be at 100%. Some people just don't want to see anybody other than the nurse, right? Like, so being at 100%, if that's your goal, you might want to readjust that goal just for that reason. But setting high goals to be able to serve people, I think is a good thing. So that's the first thing. 100%, I would say, would be a little bit unrealistic. But shooting for 80, 85, 90%, yeah, because my goal is 85% personally. So let's go back to why that may be the case. You want to find out what that starter care nurse is saying when we onboard patients. How that nurse describes what a chaplain does can make or break your invitation into that patient's home. I've heard nurses say things about chaplains like, oh yeah, if you have some religious concerns, are you a religious person? Do you go to church? This person can come out and pray with you. This person can come out and talk to God about it. Come and talk about God with you. Or, they're just good people, that sort of thing. The first thing is if someone is not religious, they're immediately going to be like, yeah, no, I pass on that. I don't want to talk about God. I'm dying, for Pete's sake. They might be mad at God. They don't want to talk about God. Or it could be someone who's very religious, but they got their own pastor. Those are my favorites because I feel like that's the best to have someone who actually knows you long term, who loves you, who can walk alongside you. So they might be like, I got my own pastor. I don't need to see her. Right? So how that starter care nurse introduces you is super important. So you want to get with that starter care nurse. And you want to be able, if you can, go on visits with her, buddy system, so she can actually see you. And you can earn her trust and she can see you work. I think that can be beneficial. Describing your work to her so that she will know exactly what you do, that can be helpful as well. Because if that starter care nurse doesn't set that up properly, you're going to be fighting uphill. That's the first thing. The second thing is, even if someone says no, they don't want to see a chaplain, and this is a big one for me, a huge one for me. I am constantly having conversations with our nursing team in the hospitals about this. And nurses, you should understand this. If someone says they don't want to see a chaplain today, why does a nurse go in so frequently to check on patients? It's because things can change moment by moment. And if you're a hospice chaplain, You know this to be true. I have been in rooms with people where they were alert and oriented times 4. And 2 hours later, they were dead. That's how quickly a decline can happen. And if that can happen in their physical bodies, I'm not quite sure why people don't understand that that could also happen in their spiritual body. So just because someone says, no, I don't want to see a chaplain or spiritual care counselor now, doesn't mean that tomorrow I'm not going to want to, or even an hour later. So one of the things that I'm always stressing to my nurses, especially in the hospital, is this. I'm going to go to that door. Okay. Thank you for trying to set it up. They told you no, they didn't want to see a chaplain. That's cool. I'm going to that door. I'm going to that door respectfully, because in the back of my mind, I'm thinking what I just told you. Maybe they didn't want to see it because of how you explained it. Maybe they didn't want to see it because of preconceived notions. Maybe they weren't in the mood at that moment. All the things. And maybe they really don't want to see a chaplain. But here's the thing. When I knock on that door, and I got this from a fellow chaplain, this mindset that I'm getting ready to introduce, this was not my original thought. I got this from a more senior chaplain who said this to me when I first started hospice chaplaincy. Patients often feel like they lack autonomy at the end of life, especially when they're in hospitals. So if the only autonomy they get to exert that day is to tell me, no, I don't want to see you, that's a win. That is spiritual care, because you are enabling them, empowering them to use their autonomy. That's a spiritual win, friend. So don't be afraid of a patient saying no to you. But also don't take no as the forever answer. So for me, that's the second thing. If you have the opportunity within your agency to introduce yourself, always introduce yourself, even if the starter care nurse says they don't want to see a chaplain. It's worth the phone call. And because I respect the nurses on my team, I will, if they tell me they don't want, that person said they did not want to see a chaplain, when I go knock on that door and introduce myself, I will reference the fact that the nurse told me that they didn't want to see a chaplain. I will reference that and say, and I just want to come by and check on you guys, right? I'm not here to overstep. It's all in how you present what you're going to do. So I guess the last thing that I want to say that might be helpful is the script that I use when I am calling or introducing myself to a new patient. And for those of you who have family members on hospice and you've been hesitant about seeing a chaplain, hopefully hearing me say this will make you more open to seeing a chaplain. So the first thing I say, ring, 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 is I identify who I am and what I do. I don't start out with small talk. I told you guys I'm a salesperson at heart. You don't want to start off with, how are you doing today, Mr. Jones? They don't even know who you are. Identify who you are and why you're calling. Okay? So I always say, ring, ring, ring. Hi, this is Leslie from XYZ Hospice. I am a part of your Mother Mary's care team. I am calling because I wanted to introduce myself and my role and how I might support your mother. Is this a good time to do that? Okay. So permission seeking is one of the things that we learn at Chaplaincy 101. In our first unit of CPE, we learn about permission seeking. But where I push back on that is people are busy. They need to understand who you are, and you set up the framework for how that conversation is going to go with how you introduce yourself. Okay. So after I get the permission by asking, is this a good time? After I've identified who I am and they say yes, then I also let them know that I'm calling for two primary reasons. The first is, number one, to see how your mother, father is adjusting to this new stage in their journey. how they are adjusting to being put on hospice, how your family is adjusting to making this decision. That's the first reason I'm calling. The second reason I'm calling is to find out what matters most to your mother and to your family during this stage of her life. Those are the two things. Notice what I've done. I'm telling them, I'm showing value, right? I'm saying, this is how I can support your person. I'm not bringing up religion, okay? Not because I don't believe in religion. I'm a pretty devout Christian. But I've learned, I shouldn't say but, and I've learned that people have their own experiences and their own preconceived notions about what religion means. We're going to get to religion. We're going to get to spirituality if it is appropriate. Okay? I'm not going to lead with that. What's most important right now is finding out how this family is adjusting and what matters most to them with the days that they have left. And if they are a spiritual person, guys, if they are a religious person, when you start talking to them about values and using values language, it's going to come up. Because if you ask about sources of strength, how are they coping? What brings them joy? If you ask me any of those questions, God would come up for me. Okay? And it will come up for them. And if it doesn't, that's telling you what you need to know as well. So that would be my suggestion, is if you are having a tough time getting in, frame the conversation, create the container for the conversation. Don't focus initially on spirituality and religion. Focus on how you can be a support. Words matter when you're trying to build relationships with people. How we say things will make the difference in if you're given an opportunity to support that person or not. And so the last thing I want to say is this. And I think about this a lot as I encounter chaplains, especially chaplains who get a lot of declines. How do I say this with love and compassion and grace? Because I can be a very straightforward person sometimes. I am an Enneagram 8. If you know anything about the Enneagram, put it in the comments. Do you believe, chaplain, that you are an integral, important part of that patient's team? A nurse would never be okay with someone not getting the care that they need. Now, they won't force it. AMA is a real thing. In a hospital, revoking hospice is a real thing. At any point in time, they can change their mind. Other clinicians, physicians, nurses understand that. But a good physician, a good nurse, that is going to bother them. My question is, as a spiritual practitioner, as a spiritual clinician, do you have the same mentality that by not seeing this person, they're not getting the total care that they actually deserve and need, and that you, chaplain, could contribute to their spiritual flourishing? That you, chaplain, could make this part of their life more peaceful, that you, chaplain, make a difference, and that you truly are an integral part of the care team. If you don't believe that, if you think that you're just a nice person to come cry and pray with people, hold hands and sing to people, bring snacks to people, all the things that a volunteer can do, needed things, but if that's all you think that you bring to a patient, that's going to come across in how you present yourself. All right, this is a much longer video than I normally record. So if you're new around here, these videos are not normally this long, but this was a pretty important question. My name is Leslie. I'm a hospice chaplain. I am creating the videos that I wish existed a few years ago when I started on this journey. Like, follow, comment, cries of outrage. And just like this, if you ask a question, if it's a good enough one, I will create a video. I'm trying to build a community here. And you, for the free $99, get to help me just by liking, commenting, and sharing this video. I appreciate you. It's the first day of Advent if you celebrate. I'm excited. This is the most wonderful time of the year as we await our King when he comes back in his second Advent. Whew, don't get me excited. I will flip this table over. But until next time, grace and peace.